Hi, everybody. My name is Renza Shibilia. I am so delighted to be here for the open closing ceremony. That is not going to get old, by the way. And I keep calling it a ceremony. I know it's a conference. It's not going to get old. I'm going to keep laughing at open closing. I have the very, very fortunate task of emceeing or hosting today's event, which means that I just get to say as little as possible, hopefully, while I introduce our incredible speakers. Now, I just do want to just for a second talk a little bit about my own We Are Not Waiting journey, which started 5.5 years ago when I started looping, although it did start before that. And it started on a rainy night in New York where I was there on a holiday with my family and somebody with diabetes told me about loop. I hadn't heard about it really. I'd heard some murmurings, but I didn't understand it. And it took me about 8 months before I plucked up the courage to actually do this. I read the documents and I thought, I can't do this. I can't code. I don't understand anything and I'm old. I can't do this. But then I eventually did pluck up the courage and I did it. And that was 5.5 years ago. And it completely changed my diabetes life. I've had diabetes for nearly 25 years. I have never, ever felt as little burden when it comes to diabetes than when I started using a GOY APS. And I knew that this was something that was revolutionary. There are words that ring in my ears that were said at one of the DeBock the DeBock symposiums, the one at ISPAD last year. And it was Tom Robinson from JDRF who said, you should never, ever, ever not bet on the type 1 diabetes community. And this work just goes to show what user-led innovation can do. And the Open project has harnessed that and has created some research around this to give some legitimacy to what we know doesn't really need it, but absolutely is critically important when we're wanting to elevate any cause at all. Now, today is about looking back a little bit, but it's also about looking forward. So I'm really thrilled that we're going to be asking a lot of what's next, and that's super, super important. Now, I've got notes here, and I'm going to just quickly refer to them to make sure that I haven't forgotten anything. I think that that's all I really need to say as a welcome, but I now get to introduce an absolute powerhouse. Now, I have some notes here, so I'm going to read what Hanne has said, but then I'm going to editorialise a little bit, and please forgive me when I do that. Hanne, stop crying now. Hanne's the COO of DeBock, which is, and I hope you all know this, an international community by and for people with diabetes. This is where we talk about the power of community. She's also the lead project manager of the Open project, and she's been involved in the project's research as well. She's a passionate type F. That's what she said. She is a human dynamo. She's a human dynamo. She doesn't stop. She's enthusiastic. She is creative. She is absolutely delightful. She is the reason that this whole event happened. And I'm so thrilled that she's going to come up now and take the stage, if she stops shaking her head, just to say a few words. So thank you, Hanne.
Thank you, Renza. Now I have to try not to cry. Otherwise it ruins my makeup that I did for just for today. And I'm a little bit nervous because most of the times I'm the woman behind the scenes. So standing in front of lots of people is totally not my forte. But I'm here to briefly tell you what's special about Open. And Renza already took the joke from me about Open is closing. And yes, it has been a running gag for the past 4 months within the team while we were planning this closing conference. So I'm not going to talk about the research because I've got all my amazing colleagues with me today that will do that. And I'm really looking forward to that. I'm just quickly going to give you a couple of aspects why Open is special. So Open is truly patient-led. So over 50% of the people involved in the project live with type 1 or type 2, we don't know, but with some form of diabetes. And that makes Open something that comes from the community, with the community, and by the diabetes community, which is amazing. And now I have to quickly look at my notes because running around, I did not have the time much to prepare for today. But 4 years ago, Open set out to deliver and investigate on various aspects of experience-based outcomes of people living with diabetes because there was clearly a gap. This research did not exist then. So we looked at clinical and patient-reported outcomes. We looked at lived experience, technical aspects, as well as barriers to uptake. So why do people not use these technologies yet? And this is what we're going to show you today. And where did the pointer go? Oh. Very important, the pointer. There we go. No, this is not the right slide. Someone messed up my order. Who was it? Who was it? All right, so on this slide, you can see all of the institutions that were involved in the research of Open. And as you can see, it's truly interdisciplinary and international. And that's not it, because we had many, many collaborators and volunteers that also helped us on the research of Open. So massive thank you to all of you that were involved. This is also the moment where I do acknowledge our funding that enabled all of the research that we've done, most of all the Horizon 2020, Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions to research, innovation, and staff exchange. I wanted to really keep this brief and leave the stage for everybody else coming after me. And I'm just going to leave you with two things. Number one, have a great closing conference. And number two, you already saw it. I'm going to pose two questions for today. Mission accomplished and what's next? Thank you, everyone.
Very good and important questions. I'm going to introduce Katarina, and when I think of an overachiever, I think of Katarina. I'm going to read some notes that I have here. So it says Katarina is a pediatrician and diabetologist at Charité, right where we are right now, which in itself is pretty amazing. But let's keep going. She's a digital clinician scientist at the Berlin Institute of Health. She's the head of medical at DeBock Labs and the co-lead of Open's clinical outcomes research. But then she decided that wasn't enough. So she recently started a new role as a head of a research group at Charité's Institute of Medical Informatics. Quite remarkable, very much an underachiever, clearly. Katarina got into this work through patient advocacy, really, and that is how I first came to know you over 10 years ago now. I'm absolutely thrilled that you're going to be speaking about Work Package 1 and talking about the work that has happened in Open as part of that. So please take it away. And
welcome everyone, and come on in. Take a seat and get cozy. It is my pleasure to tell you more about the clinical outcome research that Open has done, and I'm trying to wrap up the beginning of the 4 years of evidence that we and others have generated over the time on open source AID. So Hanne has mentioned already that we're quite international and that we're patient-led, but we are also, actually we turned the beeps off, but what could possibly go wrong when you plan an event that's hybrid, right? Anyhow, we did a number of things at Open, and one was clinical outcome research, one was quality of life and lived experience research, which Henriette and Bryan are going to talk about later. What we looked into technical improvements that we can do based on machine learning and user experience changes. And then we're going to hear from Shane, who's going to talk about barriers to scale. So when the Open survey and data collection started, it looked something like that. And by the way, it's still open, even though the project is officially ending, but you can still participate, you can still donate your data. So this is our landing page right there, where we explained all of the things that we had done. See a picture of part of the team, and the backbone behind Open looked somewhat like that. So you could open the survey and answer a number of questionnaires, but there's also a possibility to donate your device data, whether that's from a DIY AID system or from a commercial one, or not an AID at all. So there are ways from no matter what system you're using to anonymously upload your data and feed that into an open science platform. And we designed it in a way that, first of all, it's completely anonymous. You're going to be assigned an ID, and that's going to connect with your account, but we don't know who you are and we don't want to know. And then it's open designed to be an open science infrastructure. So other researchers can do research even beyond open's funding. And who joined open? A number of people who are using DIY, people who are not using DIY, adults, caregivers of children with diabetes, and there was also an option to loop partners in. And this is you guys. So this is everyone that has participated over the years in all of the studies that we have done. As you can see, quite an international crowd, more than 1,500 participants from 40 plus countries, but the common language we all speak is diabetes. And here are some of the clinical outcomes we had generated. So we asked you guys, on top of the device data, which we also analyzed, but we asked people, when you started using open source AID, what impact did it have on your hemoglobin A1C, which is like our long-term therapy marker in diabetes care? What impact did that have? And we saw that from before to after, there was a total difference of almost 1% in A1C. So people on average had an A1C of 7 point something, and then it came down on average to 6.2. And what you can see in the graph over here is that the bandwidth of A1C before they started was all over the place. There were people who were within the recommended range that's recommended by guidelines, so under 7.0, but there were also people who had an A1C that was way higher. And then when they started using AID, it all came down more or less to 6.2 or something around that. So that's quite remarkable, I think. And we also looked into age and gender aspects. So in diabetes research in general, we often see quite a difference. Studies in children do not always show the same improvements as you see, for example, in adults. Sometimes there are gender differences, but if you look at A1C, no difference at all in the crowd that we looked into. So the improvements were independent of how old you are and if you are a man or a woman or diverse. And then when we looked at time in range, there was a difference of plus 17% on average. So in time speaking, the time in range went up from 14 hours per day up to 19 plus hours per day. So almost an entire day, maybe some of the meal spikes, or maybe you had a hypo in between, but 19 hours of the day, you were within 70 or 180 milligram per deciliter or 4 and 10 millimole. And time in range is more than just a number. So I'm just going to show one little quote here from the qualitative work that we've done, just to add to the statistics. And this is from a caregiver, and they said, every single morning she's in range. And if at night she's not, we know that by the morning she will be, and that she will get there safely. We also looked into sex and gender aspects beyond A1C because we were interested in how are these results being achieved? What is so special about AID? And Darius, who's a medical student at Charité, did a little study with women using open source AID, and he actually found out even though time and range and A1C are not different, women have to do a number of workarounds to accommodate to their menstrual cycle, for example. So even if the statistics are the same, not everyone is using AID the same way. And I think this is an important aspect that we need to get back to later in our research. And we were not the only ones doing stuff on open source AID. There were a number of research teams around the world who have been active in the space. And I'm just going to briefly mention 2 other landmark publications that came out. One is co-authored by Martin DeBock and Mercedes, who's actually here with us. You're going to hear from him later, who published a study on Android APS in the New England Journal of Medicine. So I think we officially hit a glass ceiling in evidence. You can't get better than that. And maybe a reviewer from Berlin was involved. And then there was one other study who led ultimately to the regulatory approval of the FDA of tide pool loop. And this is a study about that. So first time that a regulatory authority looked at real world data to evaluate AID. So this is why this is another landmark. This is how it should be. Congrats on the tide pool team and Rayhan and everyone to get this out. And then Christine, one of our doctoral candidates, looked into real-world evidence and compared open source AID with open source. And you can see on the graph here that the outcomes were quite similar if we look at real-world data. Things are a bit different in randomized controlled trials, but if you look at real-world conditions, they are quite comparable, no matter if it's manufactured by a person by themselves or by one of the big companies out there. Yeah, and the evidence is out there, friends. Sufyan, Rayhan, and I published a piece saying, guys, we can no longer close our eyes. There's so many studies. We tested this thing in silico, in swine, in the real world, in qualitative research, in systematic reviews, and now even in randomized controlled trials. So I wouldn't know of any commercial AID system that is studied and documented this well. So congrats to everyone, also outside of Open, to achieve this. So is our mission accomplished? I think yes and no. I think we've done a good amount of work and all of the studies are out. This is great. But as I said, not everyone is using diabetes technology the same way, and one size does not fit all. So now's the time to take a closer look into gender and age aspects and other user characteristics under real-world conditions and user behavior, because we have different expectations of our AID. So now's the time to customize and improve AID for the different user groups. So why do we need professional guidance? Another thing that we have done in the clinical work package, and we're going to discuss the consensus later. Here's a quote from one of our study participants, and they said, "My diabetes doc said, officially, I cannot approve of what you're doing, but if I were in your situation, I would probably do the same." And there was a study from Tom Crabtree from the UK who looked into healthcare professional attitudes in the UK. And they had quite a number of doubts. So they said they perceive it as risky if in the wrong hands. And the majority of them felt uncomfortable initiating discussions around AID, because back then there was a lack of approval that has now changed with Tideful Loop. And also 2/3 of them said, we just don't know enough about open source AID to safely discuss it. But half of them, even though they might not know enough, said, I would exactly do the same thing if I would have type 1 diabetes. So we need guidance. And here's another person who said, my doctor is legally not allowed to support my DIY adventure. So we pretty much keep it as a don't ask, don't tell. So I think this is true risk and the opposite of safety. And it's a question of how you define safety, right? So in a clinical study, it might be a completely different definition as it is to the individual person. And if you look at risks you would have with multiple daily injections or with standalone pumping versus AID, your perception of safety might be completely different than what regulatory think. And Dana published a great comment on that, questioning if regulation of medical devices is at all just a proxy rubber stamp for safety and to sell them. And I'm going to leave that just here. And the international statement consensus we published, which was co-led by Sufyan, Rayhan, and me, was a multi-professional group of experts with professional but also personal expertise on open source AID. And just like our participants, it was quite an international crowd from 20 plus countries, including a huge group of 44 healthcare professionals from all the fields, from pediatrics, from adult care, diabetes educators were part of the co-authors, psychologists and nurses. And just because we're not expert on legal, we invited 4 legal experts to join us as well. From Marianne, you will hear later today, who's part of the group. And this paper got professionally validated. Yes, I'm hurrying. Thanks, Hanne, for keeping the time. By a number of professional diabetes organizations, namely ISPAD, the IDF, and a number of local ones. And if you're interested in reading it, it's open access with registration. So if you register at the Lancet, you will be able to access our paper for free. And it was published in the 100 Years of Insulin special issue last year. And just to briefly go over it, I don't have the time to go into detail here, but we concluded that open source AID is safe and effective. You saw the studies, they are out there, and they can help a wide population of people with diabetes alongside commercial AID. So we're not disencouraging people from prescribing and using commercial AID at all, but it's useful as an addition or if you choose them. And then go back to medical school first year, medical ethics. We all learned about the patient's right to choose their own treatment, make informed decisions, and that we have the obligation to promote their best interests. And it is our responsibility as healthcare professionals to learn about all treatment options out there. This includes open source AID, just simply because people are using it, we should learn about it. And we should seek cooperation with other healthcare professionals if we feel we don't have the time, the resources, or the background knowledge to completely understand it. AID technology should always be transparent. Every manufacturer should share details on their algorithm, explain how it works so people can use it safely. And then there are a number of benefits and limitations with open source AID. That's obvious. Open access of the code is a benefit, obviously. There are limitations such as back then there was no regulatory approval, now there is. But of course, there's no commercial helpline that you can call when something goes wrong. Safety first, as with every diabetes technology, it's important to set realistic expectations and not expect it to be a technological cure. There will be days that will be just off. And most importantly, we do not recommend anyone to violate local law or organizational governance. But if a therapy is deemed unlawful or uncertain that helps people, this should be questioned and consensus should be applied. And then finally, real-world experience should be considered by regulators. I already commented on that, and it's a wrap. This was our clinical outcome work. I'm closing with a quote from Tom Robinson. We've heard from him before, and he said, "It is no longer about a seat at the table. This is the table." I think after 4 years, we are the table.
Thank you so much. Can I ask a question before we move on? Have I got time to ask a quick question? This work is so important. So my question to you is in your mind, and I'm going to be asking everybody this, but what's next? In your mind, what do we need to do right now? Wave a magic wand and I'll make it happen.
All the data science bits. So 4 years was not enough to look into that. We're just starting that. The medical informatics team was with us in Stanford and started looking into that. Dana is going to continue the work on all of the data we actually collected. And yeah, I think key focus areas will be how to customize and how to improve the algorithm.
Yep. Fantastic. Thank you. I've got so many more questions, but if we have time, we'll come back to them. But thank you so much, Katarina. All right. We're going to mix it up a little bit right now. Look at what's going on down here. Rayhan and Sufyan, can you come up for a moment? We're going to do a bit of a Q&A. Are you using mics? Are you going to just project your voices? What are we doing? We've got these. Great. Excellent. And I know that I'm meant to introduce people, but I'm already sick of the sound of my own voice. Sufyan, tell us who you are in 2 or 3 dot points really quickly.
Yeah, sure. I'm a diabetologist, adult diabetologist in the UK, in London, and strong interest in diabetes technologies. I also work at King's College London, where I'm a part-time academic. And alongside this, live with type 1 myself for over 30 years. And along with Katarina and Rayhan, developed a very strong interest in the open source world alongside my interest in hybrid closed loops. And Katarina's already talked about some of the work that we've been involved in.
Fantastic. And Rayhan has so kindly stepped in today. Tade Battolino was going to join us, but he double booked himself, and he actually, as one of the organisers of HATD, needs to be at the conference centre. So we're so thrilled and grateful that you have stepped in now, but don't think this means that I don't call on you later, because I'm going to still do that. Tell us about you, please.
Hey guys, Rayhan, type 1 for 30 plus years like Sufyan. Electrical engineer and computer scientist by training, and then moved into medicine doing adult and pediatric endocrinology. I have about 3,200 people on open source AID systems that I take care of.
Fantastic.
Legend.
Or the 3 of you. I hope somebody's keeping a tally of how many, I usually do this and I forgot, but how many years of lived experience we have just on this stage today, because I think what we're going to see is that lived experience is coming through in so many important ways. Katarina, thanks for sticking around. So I'm going to ask you all the same question to start with, and that is actually, I want a bit of your own personal experience as clinicians here. Do you work with I don't like the word patient, but with people with diabetes who are using open source systems, and how do you support them, knowing, we've just discussed where there are perhaps some issues around regulation and what that looks like. So could you start? How does that work for you, Katarina?
Sure. Actually, I don't do many things different than with every other treatment option. So if someone's interested, we're discussing it. We're going through the benefits and cons. I clearly explain the risks. I document that. But at the end of the day, it's everyone's choice. It's the family's choice to decide what they end up using. And I support people using open source AID the same way I help everyone else. And we're not going to do many things that are different. So we're looking through their data. They can decide whatever they want to discuss on that particular day. And I help them wherever I can.
Fantastic. What about you, Sufyan?
Much the same. I guess the only addition is, in comparison to people going on commercial hybrid closed loop systems, I usually always mention, just let me know when you're going on your open source system so I can check in and make sure the settings, etc., are all dialed in correctly and things are working okay. Because with commercial systems, we have a start process that's usually supported by healthcare professionals with some education. And so it's just making sure that onboarding is going correctly. But it's much the same as what Katarina mentioned.
Yeah. And Rayhan?
And I probably take the most liberal perspective on this. So I actually start people on these systems. I offer them all, to me, all AID is AID, okay? And the reality is, of course, 288 adjustments per day are probably gonna beat 4. I basically used to, pre-COVID, meet people in coffee shops to get them up and running, do training there, and then text them back and forth to adjust settings over the first couple of weeks till we get them over 70% time in range. And then more recently have switched to a remote strategy for doing this. And in terms of the tech aspect these days, I mean, I can send a link to somebody to install on their phone. So it's very straightforward. And I, by the way, I do all this with my Tide Pool hat off and my Stanford hat off, but I think it is one of these things where there's a preponderance of evidence supporting what we do. So if it's true of commercial AID, then we need to also do the same with open source.
I'd like to go off on a tangent now, but we won't even talk about clinical appointments in coffee shops, because I think that is an absolutely brilliant model, and I'm very grateful that I get to do that a little bit with my endocrinologist, and I think that that's something that we should do. But we're not here to talk about coffee, so let's move on. So I mentioned DeBock before, and we were talking about it being by and for the community, and that's very much where the roots of open source diabetes technologies were founded. So what have you learnt from the community in your work? And I mean, I know you're all straddling, I'm part of the community as well as a clinician, but what is it that the community has taught you, knowing that you're also part of the community? So you can talk about what you've taught yourself as well.
When I started working as a medical doctor, I had to give a talk about how to involve young people in medicine and so forth. And I showed 2 slides, and that was where I learned all about the disease, and it showed a picture of my university, and where I learned all about the people. I showed pictures of the diabetes community, and I think this nicely goes along. So I encourage every healthcare professional to look what life with diabetes is like outside the 4 walls of the hospital, and seeing them as outpatients is a little bit like that, but still it's an artificial time window you look at.
Yeah.
So I think the professional knowledge we all have to always be complemented by real world experience, by experience-based evidence from people. And I've learned a hell of a lot from the diabetes community, not only about open source AID, but about everything diabetes. And of course, living with diabetes gives you lived experience, but it's not everyone else's experience. So every perspective is valuable for the clinical work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would like to ask all of you the same question. So
I think very eloquently put by Katarina. So I don't think I could top that off. But I think very similar to what Katarina's mentioned, that I think, obviously there's my own personal experiences. So I, in fact, grew up in a third world country, which is very different. In my first 10 years, the experience of medicine was extremely different. And I think it's sort of still something that I remember very well. And you don't forget that there's other sides to diabetes that we don't see here that we need to also remember. But certainly when you look at the community, there's such a diverse pool of talent. And I think that's the one thing that's come out again and again, that it's a very strong community. And we all, obviously, it's a condition that affects us so intimately. And I think when you live with it or when you care for it, that's when you really understand and can empathize with it well. And we can use our creative pool to improve aspects, not just from the open point of view and open source, but in terms of access to treatments and insulins worldwide. So I think it's been an eye-opener into understanding how the potential of us as a community can really be used to enhance care as a whole.
Yeah. Rayhan?
From the personal standpoint, I change out systems like I change dresses. I use everything. And there is but one system right now that lets me get away without bolusing. So Android APS with a dash pod. And so I am a fervent personal supporter. But when I was thankfully at my work, a lot of us live with diabetes. And some of my friends started asking me, hey, Rayhan, we know you know how to code. Can you help us set this up? And, doing it for yourself is a little different from doing it for someone else. But I took more time to dig in. And because it's open source, I can dig into it. Isn't it amazing? And I very quickly grew far more comfortable dealing with the known knowns than what I think people fool themselves into thinking they know the commercial systems, when in fact a handful of engineers around the globe probably are the only ones who actually know everything that's going on under the hood. So my thought in all of this is, if you have a system where you know what it's doing, you can really advise someone on the risks and benefits. If you don't, you really can't. And so I always, my list of risks with commercial systems is at least as long as it is for anything else.
Yeah. One of the things that I've always really loved about conversations around open source and user-led, community-led initiatives is that there's not an us and them about it. There is a place, obviously, for commercial systems, and there are learnings both ways. And I've never, ever heard anybody in the community stand up and present their research and in any way criticize commercial technologies. I would like to say I wish that could be said the other way. Unfortunately, I don't know that I've necessarily seen that at times, and I've struggled with, some of the slightly underhanded and passive-aggressive comments about safety, and so that's something that I've struggled with. But what I've loved from the community is it has been, this is just a choice, this is an option. But my question is what is it that we've learnt from the community? What is it as versus what we've learnt in terms of commercial systems, and where can they work together? Like, where do you really see that this is going in terms of being collaborative opportunities? Who wants to go first? I keep throwing you in first. Rayhan, you can go first this time.
I will say in the US market is extremely small right now, right? There's a monopoly on these things. If you want a calibration-free system right now, you have but two options. It's a tubed pump and a tubeless pump. So really, you're down to just picking, hey, do I want the tube or do I not? The beauty of the open source systems is that, hey, I actually do have a choice. I can use an Omnipod with a different algorithm. So we talk a lot about choice, but choice only exists if there are alternatives. So I think it is very important that we realize this and we spread it, because it seems like an industry likes to give us this idea that there are many options out there, when really you're kind of tied into a very particular subset. And in the EU, the situation is a little broader, but I still think having options actually then gives people the ability to select. So I think you're in an environment where if it were not for open source AID, the only decision for somebody in the US would be, do I want a tubed pump or a tubeless pump?
Yeah.
And the algorithm is probably going to come secondary to the wearability.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you next, Sufyan, but I just will say, if you do have a question, I'm going to throw to you as soon as we go through answer this question. We are on a tight time limit, and Hanne terrifies me if I go late. So, I mean, she's the sweetest thing ever, but I'm terrified of her. So if you do have a question, we might be able to take one from the audience. But
just ask, is anyone here from industry? Great, brilliant. Great, brilliant. I mean, this is the sad part that, obviously in the symposium, we've got a lot of people from the industry there, but here you guys, this is a great example of user-led innovation, of ideas that you could use. But where are you? And this is the thing, in open source, there's so many things that you can learn about how people have engineered things that are more customizable and usable by them and advantageous to them. And you can even use it in your products. There's no one hiding it. So again, there's lots of features which Rayhan's already talked about in terms of transparency of algorithm, seeing a true insulin on board, having the ability to customize and flexibly for your own personal needs. And I think there's so many lessons in there that could be used for benefit. And I think we're all here to try and get to the same end stage, which is benefiting people as a whole. It doesn't matter if it's open source or commercial, but it needs to be something that can improve the situation for people with type 1. So I think, we really want to keep that channel in line of working collectively there. And it shouldn't really be a them and us. And I think what you mentioned, there's the sort of comments that come out, it's even more so, I can tell you, in the academic world. And I think it shows, I guess, the hard work that went down in some of the publications that came across in big journals, because again, reviewers do knock it down for those sort of reasons. Absolutely. So we need to make a level playing field here, and things that improve the lives of people should just be supported. And hey, you guys, I'm really grateful for you to come here. Tell your friends, this is such an asset to be around, because you will learn things. But I look forward to catching up with you later, perhaps in the break, and we can talk more on that.
Yeah, I really thank you for being here. It really is so wonderful. I've got like 3 minutes, so you go, and then who's going to ask a question? Start putting your hand up so I can come to you. Go.
I'm trying to keep this short.
Good.
So we can take a question from there. But I can only second that. Hey, industry people, and I'm preaching to the choir because I see the typo logo up there, but I've learned from the community how much interoperability actually is a thing.
Yes.
So regulatory authorities designed the process to be interoperable. Your devices are not, almost universally. So please change that, because user choice makes a dramatic impact. And I learned from people when they actually have the chance to put their system together with the sensor they love, with the one that doesn't give them false readings, with the algorithm they choose, because it's the easiest for them to use. And then with their pump of choice, they're really happy with that combination. And it's a pity that this is not available as it is if you DIY it.
And I feel also that our own buy-in then, when we have made those choices because we've chosen the things that we feel work best for us and we know do, 100%. There is far more, that I know this sounds ridiculous, but gosh, I love my devices because it's working so beautifully for me. So absolutely. Now we had a question. You can ask a question. Great question,
so I also wear an IDF badge, with IDF Europe, and it's a big issue in terms of equity and access to care universally. I mean, certainly where I grew up in Pakistan, in a third world country, it's very variable, and it depends on your level, how affluent you are. And I got lucky with the way I was, but certainly even there right now, getting access to analog insulins is not there. It's not part of there. And even getting access to insulins as such takes a lot of effort. The technology we're talking about is a fridge to keep your insulins cool in a warm country. So I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done about redistributing, recognizing that there's a bit of redistribution of resources, and we all have a part to play. Everyone has a part to play in doing that, and even industry, some of whom have been very supportive in offering opportunities to improve that sort of accessibility. Before we can even talk about getting pumps and CGM, I mean, the cost of a CGM there is probably an annual salary for an average person for a 2 week CGM. annual salary. So, you can just see that things need to be re-looked at in terms of cost and equity. And I think there's going to be some focus on talking about more cheaper options for pumps later on in the session.
And even though the CGM, pump, insulin are all ridiculous criminal expenses, the reality is we can make the algorithm free at least. So the equity for the algorithm and the open source side of things is wonderful. I also wanted to give a shout out to the man with the Tide Pool sticker on his laptop. That's Howard Look, who is pretty much single-handedly responsible for getting Tide Pool Loop approved. So thank you, Howard.
Leon, I did see your hand up, but we haven't got time, but hold your question and perhaps you can ask. But thank you so much to our speakers. I would just like to say, before I get you to all give them a big round of applause while they leave the stage, is I would encourage you at ATTD to really continually look at everything you're seeing through the lens that Katie just mentioned. It is always so exciting and tempting to focus on all the shiny new things, and I know that I'm very much guilty of that all the time, but remembering that there are a lot of people who we're just got to make sure that people can get insulin and blood glucose strips. So considering that through everything we're doing over the next week, I think is really important. Thank you so much. This could have gone on all day, but we have got more people that we want to hear from. So thank you very much. Please give them a round of applause. Now, I get to make you do some work, don't I? We're going to do some Menti. We're going to do a Menti question. Excellent. Everybody, grab your phone. And go to menti.com. I think that's yes, menti.com. And then there's a code 3893-4873 and answer the question. It is an open dialogue box. You can say whatever you would like. People at home, because we do know that there are people viewing from home, hello, you can also do this. If you can't see that number again, so it's menti.com 3893-4873. And the question is, future directions for open source systems, given the presence of commercial systems, where do we see this going? We get to all be predictors of what's happening. Look through your crystal ball. Interoperability. Gosh, that's a favourite word. Lots of interoperability. Mission accomplished. Really? I think there's still so much more to go. Or is that where we're going? We're going to have everything accomplished. Yes. How can we make IoT components more accessible and affordable? And I do really love that that is a constant theme in community conversations. It really is. It is always a discussion that we have. Yes, always leading the field because they are developed and designed by people living with diabetes. Gosh, that interoperability, forced interoperability, but that interoperability thing is super important, isn't it? Affordable options. So great. We will be able to bring all of these together, won't we? And we can share them. Absolutely. Integration of smartwatch data. Okay, so these are so fully closing, open can do it quicker. And I know that there are people in this room who very much talk about using fully closed loop systems now. David Byron laughs at me when we are sitting there and I have to bolus for my lunch because he goes, bolus, gosh, what is it? You're so 3 years ago. He makes me feel like, you know, I'm using, I don't know, 1950s technology when I hang out with him, even though I am using Loop. All right. Okay. Keep adding to this just for a minute. Is that okay? Am I already at time? Okay. Oh my gosh. All right. I know she's great. Why don't people keep doing that? And while they're doing that, I can now introduce Bryan. Have I got that right? Yes, Bryan, come on up. Fantastic. Thank you. So Bryan is a senior researcher at Steno Diabetes Centre in Copenhagen, and he works with psychological health and diabetes, which has been part of the focus of Open. It's not all about clinical outcomes. It is also very much about the emotional well-being of living with diabetes, because we know it's not just all about numbers. He was a work package lead in Open on patient-reported outcomes. He says he has no specific outstanding qualities, but he tries to be nice. That's a pretty outstanding quality because you are nice.
Well, yeah, but then I was thinking yesterday maybe I got a bit carried away, saying I tried to be nice. Who am I to say what nice is? So I just say, mate, no outstanding qualities. Brian tries.
Brian tries. Isn't that nice? All right, I'm going to go sit down. I'll let you talk. I think you're quite delightful, though, so I think that's pretty outstanding.
Okay. Anyway, thank you, Renza. Thanks everybody. It's really my honour and privilege today to be here. There we go. To present these findings from the kind of patient-reported outcomes within the Open project. Obviously, I'm only going to be able to give you a glimpse of what we've done in the last 4 years. So we've done a lot. We've got a lot of data, and we've done some amazing things. But I hope that I'll give you a kind of flavour for that today in the kind of time I've got. And time me, because I'm probably going to go over time. So anyway, you might want to ask, what are patient-reported outcomes? I mean, that could be actually a long discussion, but I'll just, for this kind of the purposes of today, just simply limit myself to kind of saying how we essentially operationalize them in this kind of project. So we basically talked about it as two things. On the one hand, we have these two within the work package on patient-reported outcomes. We had one deliverable looking at quality of life and related outcomes. We were still talking about DIY then. And then this was basically based on the survey that Katarina's already described, so we got that kind of data from there. And then in the second part, we looked at lived experience, where we obviously used much more qualitative data, including sort of interviews, photo elicitation, and diaries and autoethnography. So I'm going to try and present a little bit of all of that in the next 10 minutes or so. So I think, on the one hand, it's quite clear that concepts such as quality of life and lived experience are central to this, to OSAID. I mean, essentially, this is kind of technology that's kind of been born out of lived experience with the primary aim of improving quality of life. So, it's in that sense very central to what's going on here. But at the same token, I think we also have to admit right from the outset that concepts like quality of life and lived experience, they have a kind of different feel, a different makeup to them, essentially, than something like measures such as time in range or HbA1c. So, although we can say that all measures, in a sense, have their controversies, in the case of something like TLC, we have a kind of very precise idea of essentially what we're measuring and how improvements in the measure impact upon overall health and well-being in people with type 1 diabetes. So when we're dealing with psychosocial measures, or metrics, then there's a little bit that's about the conceptual work that's more open-ended. But, I mean, and again, there's a lot of big questions and discussions there. All I will say for the time being is that we were very lucky in this regard in Open, that we had a great team of leading researchers in the area of quality of life research, including James Spate, Timothy Skinner, Christel Hendricks, and Ingrid Villeng, who helped us to guide us and navigate us through some of the kind of big questions that we needed to kind of confront there, and basically what to focus on and how to do it. So, I mean, the first part of what I'll present here for you today is based on the kind of the survey and the findings from that, which I'm just going here. Yeah, so we basically, as we were kind of constructing the kind of items and the sort of measures that we wanted to put into the quality of life survey, we, as sort of general practice, we drew on previous research, and we did also based on some of our qualitative work. And then at the same time, so we were looking at this. There's a clear sort of reason to do this research. In previous studies have kind of indicated that there's improvements in patient-reported outcomes, quality of life measures. But our study, I think, is one of the first one that's used these standardized measures on such a large scale. So that's an important point of what we've done here, I think. So, and as has been kind of noted, I mean, there's Vallis and Holt in the special issue of Diabetic Medicine that Ingrid and myself were kind of the curators of, mentioned that this is a kind of the need to kind of conduct quality of life or patient-reported outcome studies using these standardized measures amongst people using OSAID systems is a very important kind of goal and a missed opportunity as long as we haven't done it. So now we've done that and we've sort of set the benchmark, at least, I think we can say. So, obviously, as already been said, I mean, this was very much a collaborative exercise. And all of the people, so aside, in addition to the people I've mentioned, I mean, obviously, there was a whole team of people behind it doing a lot of the actual hard work. So a great thanks to them. It was obviously, as Katarina's also mentioned, a global study for adults with type 1 diabetes who were able to understand written English. Recruitment was online, an online community platforms, open social media, and our website. So, and from our point of view, I mean, the whole survey itself was much bigger, but just looking at the kind of the patient-reported outcomes, we had these 8 sort of measures or scales looking at these patient-reported outcomes. So yeah, as I was just saying before, so it was very much informed partly by our qualitative research, then a sort of literature review, a kind of consideration of the psychometrics in these scales and what they would sort of, how they would relate to life with type 1 diabetes and life with OSAID. And then clearly we also drew upon the sort of lived experience of the team and the professional expertise that I already talked about. And so then we had these sort of basically 8 or so which we've used in the survey, including general emotional well-being. Oh, sorry. That's not going to go back, is it? Subjective sleep quality, and then diabetes-specific, and the diabetes-specific quality of life, diabetes-specific positive. Sorry, sure. I'll look at it that way. Diabetes treatment satisfaction, diabetes distress, and then fear of hypoglycemia. So these were the sort of major scales that we used in the survey to assess quality of life. These are the demographics, which I think Katarina has also really showed a lot about. I mean, again, there's slightly more in the user group, slightly more men, slightly higher income, slightly longer education, slightly lower HbA1c. But we, in our analyses, we took these covariates into consideration in our comparisons between the users and non-users. So yeah, we had a good size sample. As you can see here, these are the kind of presentation of the results, where essentially across the board there are significant differences, but with specifically diabetes-specific positive well-being, diabetes treatment satisfaction, and diabetes distress being highly significant, better for people using open source AID than the standard care. So these are, I mean, and generally, as I say, these are very much standardized scales, so that these scores can be used and can be compared. I mean, we are publishing this work now. It hasn't, as I think it was also alluded to previously, not been without its challenges in terms of trying to justify this sample and the kind of selection of this sample and the kind of things about comparability. But yeah, that's again another kind of bigger discussion. But I think that we can safely say, at least, that we've demonstrated, at least here, that there's a very clear impact on quality of life, and just that it's very positive for people using OSAID. So strengths of this particular part of our study were that it was with a very kind of careful consideration of which items and measures to include. So we used these validated scales, had this multinational reach. There were, I mean, and I'm not sure about this figure, to be honest, 23% of people at the time, but at least it was a significant portion of people. We had, especially in Germany, I think a lot of the people that were using OSAID were involved in our survey. And yeah, so we've included a lot of other kind of covariates that make the comparison slightly more valid. By the same token, there are certain limitations in what we've done. So the fact that it's online recruitment is very sort of, in a sense, a convenience sample, self-selection bias. People had to understand English, and we're comparing basically unequal sample sizes. And there were, as it said, there was a lot from Germany. There was basically 3 countries that constituted more than 50% of our answers. So mainly white ethnicity, and it's a cross-sectional survey. So to be honest, there's a lot more that I could say about the survey in itself and about the quality of life results in the survey, but I want to kind of carry on into another aspect of what we've looked at, which is, but yeah, just to say that we basically knocked it out of the park on all of those. We're better in OSAID on every score. But I now want to go from one thing where we've just been looking at kind of generic data, well, not generic data rather, but data acquired from lots of people, to another extreme, which is more in the context of lived experience, where I'm showing a picture of Jonathan Garfinkel, who's a person living with type 1 diabetes who loops. He's also an author, and he's been writing, I mean, he kind of jumped onto open about halfway through, I think just before COVID, in fact. And he'd been writing a diary, a sort of, loop diary, if you will, a diabetes diary, as he calls it. And I think that he calls it autoethnography, and he's basically working towards a PhD. And this sort of a combination of very much a reflection on his own lived experience with a literary sensibility is a very kind of powerful kind of form for data, even though it is, in a sense, an N=1 for qualitative research. So I'm actually going to read this out. I'm sorry it's such a long text, but it'll be worth it if I can make it in the time. But this is an excerpt from Jonathan's diary, 5 minutes perfect. I remember sitting, this is talking about the first time that he's just gotten kind of hooked up onto Loop. I remember sitting in my father's car, staring at the green light on my phone. I was unable to comprehend what had just happened, if the artificial pancreas even worked, but I knew something had changed. I turned on the radio. There was a corny Hank Williams song about losing somebody, being heartbroken. You know the way that Hank Williams sings his heart out. Suddenly I burst into tears. Life with diabetes carries a lot, but I hadn't cried like this in years, perhaps since I was first diagnosed at the age of 12. Doesn't mean that I didn't feel things. There's always a concerned voice living in the background. The daily gamut of choices, decision, calculations wears on the person living with it. Feelings of shame, failure, and guilt are part and parcel of living with an imperfect, prosthetic existence. I also have to figure out how much insulin to take or not to take, how much to eat or not eat, what is working, what isn't, what will this walk do to me, what this swim or cycle will do, or the profound impact of sitting on my arse for 12 hours straight. And the truth is, it's never quite right. Some calculation is always off. And then as he sort of, I don't want to kind of just short circuit it a little bit, the reason that I cried that day in the car because of the idea of a system that might make things easier, touch something in me, the possibility of transformation, of some kind of less worrisome existence. Both terrified and excited me, of course, while sitting in my father's car listening to Hank Williams, staring idiotically at the solid green light on my phone. I didn't actually believe the artificial pancreas system would work. That would take time. So I think that, yeah, as I say, it's a very much a personal story. It's an individual's, it's idiographic, but at the same time, some of the aspects of this, I think, resonate very widely. I mean, there are at least very much kind of plot structures here that would be familiar to anybody that's living with type 1 diabetes using Loop, I think. I have another example of him. I won't read it all out, and just for the time, but the point here is this is talking, again, this is an extract from the diary, where he's having, I mean, it's like he's made a mistake with putting his tube in, and so that he thinks that Loop's working, it's not working, and then he has this nasty experience. The point I want to highlight about this really is that he says at the end, so I go online basically to get help. I tell the group, sheepishly, I'll tell the group what's happened. I get a few comments, remarks of sympathy, points of advice, mostly confirmation I'm on the right page. So Jonathan, in this kind of crisis, in being in a foreign city, sort of panicking a little bit about not having had insulin for 5 hours, the first place he goes to is they're in these online groups. And again, just kind of echoing things that have been said earlier already today about the kind of power of the community. And that was really, I mean, so this was all I was going to say about Jonathan. Again, he's written a massive amount. I've just kind of selected a few excerpts from it for exemplary purposes, but his work is really kind of powerful and contributing, I think, to an understanding, a greater understanding of the lived experience of what we're looking at. And I've got 2 minutes left, so I will just say about, in the last 2 minutes. So another kind of data we had was open. So in the surveys, we asked for people just to fill in, these open-ended responses at the end, which usually you get nothing from. They're usually kind of useless. But in this instance, I mean, what happened was that people had a lot to write about. So we just got reams of data, hundreds and hundreds of people talking about their experiences, which I've clipped some of these out. I'm not going to read any of these, but I just wanted to highlight, and yes, I am cherry picking them, but that's kind of my privilege today. So it's the essentially social nature, again, of sourceAID, and how both in terms of the kind of practical instrumental support, it's certainly about peer support, but it's also bigger than peer support. It's also a kind of movement that has, in a sense, social political dimensions. I'll just end, I think, then really on the final quote, which I think captures a lot of that, which is, but the support of the looping community is a huge part of the reason why looping is as straightforward as it is. From the detailed loop docs to the online support, real-time and more informed than any commercial support I've ever had from a pump company. To the people I have met in the community I'm so privileged to be part of, I've never had friends with type 1, not deliberately, but I never felt constrained by type 1 and never wanted to go out and seek support. Through looping, I found this new community of people who are not just defined by their type 1, even if we spend a ton of time working on it, and are just so amazing what they do and how they help others. I'm so grateful to everyone who's been involved in bringing looping to this stage, and I'm so hopeful for what the community as a whole can achieve in the future. And I think just as a final word, I mean, in many ways for me, this aspect of it has been the surprising part from the scientific. In a sense, you tell me that somebody's given a system and it helps them sleep through the night and it manages their blood sugar. I'm not surprised that improves their quality of life. I mean, it seems fairly obvious to me that that's going to improve your quality of life as long as you have access to it and you can get it to work. But this part where there's this whole sort of secondary dimension almost of the social value of being part of this is, I think, something that's sort of been very profound to observe. And I look forward to kind of continuing to observe and follow it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take a seat, but I'm going to bring you back shortly. The power of those words, though, I got a bit teary. I don't know if anyone else did. Yes, they're... Oh, do you want to say your last slide?
Well, my slide is there. Well, you know, I had this sign. I carried it around I had this sign which I carried around for months, and it was in Berlin and it was in Copenhagen. Can you go back? Because it was not that sign, obviously this sign. So I literally had this sign, and but now it's no longer. We're now closed. But I think I'd like to say we're closed for refurbishment, and we'll be back soon. So thank you, Hanne, for remembering that slide.
It is just a start. It is just a start. But yes, I just want to pick up on that because the power, come on up, Henriette, while I'm just blabbing for a minute. The power of those lived experience stories are what makes this so real and so important. Henriette, thank you for joining us. I'm going to read the lovely words that you've prepared, and I know you said I didn't need to read out the third point, but I'm going to anyway. So here we go. So Henriette is Associate Professor at the Centre for Medical Science and Technology Studies at the University of Copenhagen, and she's contributed to Open Work Package 2, also on patient-reported outcomes. And the first investigation she did during her university studies in psychology back in 1996.
Or maybe 94.
Or 94.
Sure. Yeah.
Was about a community of Danish computer hackers.
Yes.
I know we're not allowed to say hacking in this room, but
I know
look at that. It was like
nevertheless.
setting the scene.
Yes,
looking forward to your presentation.
definitely.
Thanks, Henriette.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It's really great being here. And it has been a huge privilege to be invited to be part of the open research. I've been asked here today to actually take us a little bit away from open. It might be uncomfortable, but I think it might also be quite interesting. I've been part, I've also participated in doing some of the analysis and the work that Bryan just presented, but my research has brought me through many different disease areas and people's engagement with digital health. So really what I wanted to do here, and I hope that's also what I was asked to do, was to take a look at kind of questions of digitizing care more broadly, and some of the social aspects revolving around those efforts to mobilize digital tools to improve healthcare beyond just diabetes. And I think what I really want to, of course, end by is saying something about how we might learn something about making more caring ways of digitizing, more caring practices of disease management by learning something from open and learning something from looping. So that's what I'm going to do. And of course, the history of digital health is already very long, and we can, diabetes is one case where there is a long history of using personal devices, some digital more lately, but but the self-quantification is definitely something that goes back a long way. But that also counts for a lot of other areas. Something like Holter monitor in heart disease goes back to the 50s. And of course, if we just talk about self-quantification, the bathroom scale or the thermometer goes back a long time. So the fact that people are involved in managing their own care with devices and with digital systems go back a long time. And my own start in doing studies of digital health was concerned with first experiments with trying to let people with asthma upload peak flow readings to online platforms, and that's 20 years back now. Lately, it's, as you know, and that you are at the forefront of, much more about mobilizing advanced algorithms, prediction, personalization, and we can definitely also see that coming in a lot of other areas. I'm currently involved in work in epilepsy as one area where that is also the focus. And what we definitely can say over this time is that the medium of care is never neutral. It does so much to how care is performed. Sometimes we can forget these mediums because they are all around us. We don't, like fish in water, don't see the water they're in. We might not see all the mediums that we actually use to let care take place. But it makes sense, now that mediums of care are so important, to ask what they actually do to care. And for that, I try to just start with a couple of kind of the rerun of the classic notion of what do digital tools do for care, and in particular individualized digital tools. And the well-known answer is that they provide empowerment. And I'm sure that is something that you would also subscribe to, that, you know, that people become knowledgeable with the ability of having their own tools and having their own readings close to them in their everyday lives, that it enables a lot more options, personalization, self-reliance. But in a way, it's also interesting that when we are talking about digitization and empowerment, we often see people sitting in sofas. You know, that it's something comfortable, that, you know, that it's easy. Of course, it's not easy. It's also framed with a lot of challenges and problems. And there are many critics in kind of the research that I'm in that would say, well, if we just talk about empowerment, we don't see also the huge amount of responsibilization that comes with digital tools. And that's both related to the responsibility of kind of the individual burden of managing health with technology. And here, of course, we are also talking about health issues that are not necessarily alike diabetes, where you actually have to make very profound decisions all the time, but where it's about kind of following your measures over time, or it can be in mental health or many other places. And here some of the critics would say, well, actually we are over-responsibilizing the individual and potentially exploiting also individuals, particularly when we are dealing with systems that hook people up on kind of Googleized health platforms where private companies have as much an interest in harvesting their data for other purposes rather than for the purpose of caring for them. So there are definitely kind of critics that would say there are problems with the immense digitization and individualization of care that comes along. So my point would say, okay, of course, there are definitely problems with this contrast, either empowerment or responsibilization. This is not what are in the stories that we've just heard, right? Definitely not. And also beyond diabetes, this is not what is in the story. But we still need to think about what counts as care. And here I propose us to talk about responsibility and thinking about care not as something that is just about individuals, but is, as Bryan also talked about, profoundly social in its existence and about relating to others rather than just relating to a technology. And here I draw on ethics of care, a philosophy of care, among others, John Tronto, who has done some wonderful work in trying to describe how care should be thought of as a practice. It's something that all of us are doing all the time to repair, maintain the world we are in, to live as well as possible. And that is really what care is about, trying to, the never-ending task of trying to live as well as possible in the world. And care as responsibility is about the ability and the willingness to actually respond to the need that are presented to us in the world or in our bodies, but definitely also beyond ourselves as individuals. So really the question that rather than talking all the time about specific technologies and what they do, I think we can learn a lot also from the Open Project by asking, how do people experience digital health arrangements beyond the specific technology, and also algorithmic care increasingly as able to respond. If we look across the board of many different kinds of digital health technologies and people's experience of living with these, ambivalence is a recurring theme, that people have experienced great benefits from using digital tools, the quantification that enables knowledge and action can also be extremely emotionally straining. The instantaneity of results that can come on your iPhone can be really helpful in making decisions, but it can also, like pictured up there, come at very inconvenient times. If you are a person with HIV who is getting a viral load information while you're in the middle of a meeting, and you might not know what that will mean to kind of the future of your treatment regime. So there are these often contrasting experiences that people meet. But more importantly, how does the whole infrastructure, the whole system respond and support people who might experience also negative results from their personal digital tools? And here, just consider, for instance, a woman who has recently got her hip operated. She has been sent home, newly operated, to do home training with a virtual trainer. So an algorithm will decide for her how she can train her hip at home. And that's very helpful, that she can go home and train and be supported by technology. At the same time, this woman might experience pain from training, from the responses that or the instructions given by the virtual trainer. And this is part of a research I was involved in. And what this woman, for instance, she told us was, well, what should I do? The device is telling me that I should train this way, but I'm getting, I'm hurting. And when I try to ask the physiotherapist, there's no one there. They never answer the phone. They will not instruct me in how I can do it better. They just say, okay, if it hurts, then you shouldn't do it. On the other hand, I'm told to follow the instruction of the virtual trainer. And what happened here was the fact that they had fired the physiotherapists because the money had to go to developing the virtual trainer system. So there was no infrastructure behind to really pick up on, of course, the need for adaptation, for customization of this treatment. And there are so many examples of this also in my research, that maybe the tool works, maybe the tool doesn't work, but the question is, what is the context of it working, of it actually making a positive difference? And here, of course, it's not about people being victims of technology, because people are resilient. Also in the research I've done, way beyond diabetes and open. Of course, open is the epitome of resilience and resilient cyborgs, and about repair work that turns into actual, groundbreaking innovations. But this is all around, because without repair work, there is no care. Care is, trying to get things back on track and to live as well as possible. So, yes, I'm rounding off here, and just to say that this kind of repair work goes on in so many other areas of disease, many less advanced, but still very comparable to what we see in OSAID. So finally, and this is as much a question to you as it is a question that I would put a few words on, is, I think there are so much that other disease areas can learn from looping and from OSAID, but definitely that insights about the willing and ability to respond can come from many other places than the kind of traditional, institutionalized or private sector of providing care. It can come from community, as we've shown so much in this research, and that all of you know, and that it's so necessary that people do not get locked into unresponsible systems and opaque or technology that is not responsible. We need to fight that, among other things, with the stories that come along here today. So, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Bryan, come back up. Stay there. No, stay there. We've got some more Menti questions, but I'm going to chat with you about them. So get out your phones again, everybody who's here and everybody who is at home. It's the same number, so you just need to go back to where you were. And we have a couple of questions. So I would like to hear from you. I'm going to start with you, Henriette, about this. So what impact, if any, does the emergence of commercial AID systems have on the diabetes community and people with diabetes? So what questions and challenges will it need to address in future? What do you think about that? So, we have this push and pull, don't we, between what's happening in the community and what's happening commercially. What are the considerations in your mind?
I can say this.
Yeah.
So I think that, one of the reasons for posing this question, in a sense, is like when we started, and I don't know if it's just my impression, but when we started 4 years ago, how many was it ago? More actually than when we started doing the whole application. It seemed very much that there was this kind of tight alignment between We Are Not Waiting, open source AID, and the online community. And whereas now, and again, I'm not sure if it's like it was always the case, but now there seems to be a lot more diversity around both the technology and the issues. And then I'm just, I suppose, interested in this question about whether it's necessary to have a kind of focus, a topic in a way to animate the community, or whether the community has a kind of enough momentum and resources within it to cover all of the things that essentially fall within its remit.
Yeah, I remember hearing somebody say when the first commercial hybrid closed loop system came on the market in Australia, oh well, I guess that means that the DIY movement's done now. I thought, you're kidding? Really? What, you think everyone's just going to pack up and go and find a new hobby? What do you think about that? Like, how does that? What do you feel about?
I think that, of course, things change all the time, and what people will be, what would be important to them. But I think that there have been, a very important change that will not, of course, go back in terms of, for instance, people have have community, and
Yes.
you don't give up community from one day to the other.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, also just that there are so many things still worth discussing and changing. And I think, for instance, as I try to say, I think there is reason for also bringing this up among other patient groups and providing these insights beyond diabetes.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Yeah, definitely. And thanks for the comments that are coming in. I think that there is still lots to do. We're certainly not done. And we have a second question, don't we, Hanne? So let's talk about this one. So can and should, so we've said the DOC, which is Diabetes Online Community, but let's just talk people with diabetes. Can and should people with diabetes have a role in formal healthcare? I think we do have a slightly skewed group here who are like, what sort of a question? How is that even a question? But let's talk about it.
Yeah, but I mean, actually, I think, so your kind of qualification of the question.
Excuse me.
If you kind of turn the question your way, then I think you get answers like this. I think, but in a sense, the kind of idea behind, I think, the question is that it seems that as a community, as a sort of informal institution almost, it's the diabetes online community is thriving and it's functioning really well, which somehow stands a little bit in contrast to what we see with informal healthcare, which maybe things aren't thriving so well. And I guess it's, of course, people with diabetes should have a role in healthcare, but it's more, as I say, this kind of formalized side of it. I mean, is there something that we can do to integrate what's going on in sort of informally in the community spontaneously? Or would it lose its value if we did that? That's the kind of thing that's sort of up in the air for me there. It's it seems as if there could be a role in formal healthcare to kind of support things that aren't going so well, but would that then kind of change the nature of the beast? I don't know. Yeah.
It's almost like we need a hashtag, something like, I don't know, nothing about us without, just spitballing, nothing about us without us. That might work. Okay, all right, we do need to, did you want to add something to that?
Well, I just think that in the Open Project, there's already been so great examples of these interfaces between the community and formal healthcare. So I think there's so much to work on from there already, right? Yeah. So
amazing. All right. Thank you so much. Keep answering for a moment while we're going to do some little tech things now because we've got a video. Yes, we do have a video. All right. And unfortunately, Dana Lewis can't be here, and I feel that is a really massive shame because Dana is such a driver in this community and this world, and also in the Open Project. I feel like I don't really need to introduce her, but I am going to nonetheless read what she has provided us. Dana Lewis is the creator and developer of Open APS, the first open source automated insulin delivery system. She's a writer and has written books about automated insulin delivery for kids and adults. She's also now a researcher and has worked in and outside of Open to help research and improve AID for people with diabetes. She's also an incredibly wonderful, wonderful person, and I'm so fortunate that I get to call her a friend. We have some videos that she has prepared for us because she can't be here, so please sit back and watch. And Dana, if you're watching, hello darling, and we're so thrilled that you could be here in this way.
Hi everyone, I'm Dana Lewis, and I'm excited to share some of the output from Work Package 3 in the Open Project. I'll be talking through two different data sets that we used, what we did and how we did it. And what we were trying to do was answer the question of how might machine learning be used to learn from and then propose improvements to open source AID in the future. We started with data sets, particularly starting with the Open APS Data Commons, which is a donated anonymized diabetes device data set coming from people living with diabetes. An early version of the data set found that there's over 46,000 days worth of data. This is glucose data, insulin dosing data, and AID, Automated Insulin Delivery data, that is hosted on a platform called Open Humans. The Open Project also initiated a project on Open Humans to gather another AID data set, and we wanted to also gather demographic and other survey data in the Open Project. So we then asked the question, how do we enable the pairing of demographic survey data and quality of life and other survey data with the ability for people to donate their diabetes device data while remaining and retaining privacy and anonymity? So we came up with a solution called the Gateway. which is a full open source solution. We have a paper with the DOI listed there that points to the code and talks about how we use this platform. And we're particularly proud of this solution because it was not only useful for us to pair survey data and diabetes data, but it's also going to be useful for other research projects, including those outside of diabetes, who want to pair anonymized wearable and medical device data with survey data through REDCap or other survey platforms, as this is something that's relatively common in research. Now, the Open project, through the surveys, had over 696 participants, which is amazing. And of those, we found about 129 had also donated diabetes data. And from there, we pulled out those who were using AID. So we found about 96 people using AID in the Open project who had also filled out the survey data. Now, I had mentioned that we had the Open APS Data Commons already, and the early version of that had over 46,000 days of data. And we had already done an analysis showing that you can do large-scale, data-driven glycemic variability analysis alongside traditional glucose outcomes for AID research. And what we wanted to do in Work Package 3 was look at both the Open data set and the Open APS Data Commons. So one of the things that we did was build a deduplication tool that allowed us to identify possible duplicate individuals between both data sets. Because what we wanted to do was not recreate analysis on somebody who had already been analyzed in the Open APS Data Commons. So using this tool, we were able to identify 21 duplicates, remove them, and the Open data set that we used for our analyses was about 75 people. And of those 75 people, these are AID users, they had over 36,000 days worth of data. And the average person donated over 491 days of data, which is amazing. The average glucose was around 132 milligrams per deciliter. And the average age of our participants in this survey and this data donation was 41. And the other thing that I found really interesting is that the average diabetes duration in this data set is 35 years. So people have been living with diabetes for a long time. And most of these participants also had quite a few years of pump experience and CGM experience, almost 12 years of pump experience, about 4.5 years of CGM experience. And then obviously open source automated insulin delivery is a little bit younger than pump and CGM technology. And so the average participant had been using an open source AID for a little under 2 years. And we also did glucose analysis on this data set, finding that the mean or average 70 to 180 milligrams per deciliter was around 82%, with time spent low, less than 3.66%, and time above range, time above 180, of about 14%. And of these folks, fewer than 25% of people had time in range less than 76.9%, and over 25% had time in range above 89.8%. So this matches what we saw with the Open APS Data Commons and a lot of other data sets and surveys on open source AID users getting above goal, above range outcomes. One of the things that we also did was a machine learning cluster analysis to see if there were any obvious patterns in this data set. And we didn't find any, which is a good sign. It adds evidence that there's not additional poor outcomes being caused by open source automated insulin delivery. Another analysis we did looked at gender differences. So of those who reported being male or female, we looked at glucose outcomes at different times of day, throughout the hours of the day, which is what's illustrated on screen here. And you can see that there's a slight difference between females and males in terms of the hours of the day and the glucose levels. We also looked at days of the month of the year, in some cases small differences, but this one was the most obvious difference to us. We also compared between the two data sets. We found some really common similarities. Obviously, both data sets, very high above goal time in range numbers. Time in range was very anti-correlated with time spent above 180. And the time spent low and the low blood glucose index was fairly similar across both data sets. And we also didn't see any significant gender differences between the two data sets. We did find some statistically significant differences in some of the other glucose variability metrics. So what this suggests to us is that there should be additional looking at these different data sets and future data sets of AID users to see what some of these differences might be. Some of them might be because the Open APS Data Commons has more data going back to 2015, 2016. And obviously the AID systems we have changed over time. So I think we should do some additional work on point in time of calendar time similarities so we can compare 2018 to 2018 or 2022 to 2022, for example. I also would love to see us do deeper analysis into the insulin dosing and AID data variables that we have available as well as point people to doing additional research on user behavior patterns for individuals and see what behaviors of things that we do to operate these AID systems correlate with different outcomes. Now, the other project we did was a big project using machine learning and deep learning on this open source AID data. We did an analysis on past work on machine learning. We found that much of the forecasting work done on diabetes data has limited prediction horizons, so they're pretty short, 30 to 60 minutes. They typically don't study these larger data sets. They're maybe analyzing a few dozen people over a few weeks rather than thousands and thousands of data points. And they're not looking at the computing cost, which means it's hard to extrapolate or guess how these systems could be used in AID systems in the future. So that's what we set out to do, is to answer some of these questions of, could we use machine learning with these larger data sets and look at the glycemic variability metrics? We took a sample of 19 people from the Open APS Data Commons, looking for pretty diverse individuals in terms of gender, geographic representation, and also from all three common types of open source AID systems. And we did predictions. We used different models of machine learning to do forecast, and we used different amounts of data, 30 days of data, 60 days of data, to train the systems and look at the different resulting accuracy forecasts. And we also looked at the computing cost to try to predict what is the trade-off between accuracy of these predictions over different timeframes based on the amount of training data, and also the cost to potentially implement one of these algorithms into an AID system in the future. And so we found that we can extend the prediction horizons hours or days in advance. So instead of 30 or 60 minutes, this suggests that we can get good predictions for the next week or the next month. And we can do this and lower the computing cost for these longer predictions, which might enable us to actually integrate these into open source AID as an additional prediction line alongside the existing prediction lines. For example, with Open APS and Android APS, there's multiple prediction lines. This could be integrated as a possible prediction line. But I also think that there's options to be able to use this outside of open source AID, which is a really, really exciting potential option. So our question was, how can we use machine learning to learn about diabetes and also propose improvements to open source AID? And we found through Work Package 3 over the course of the Open project that we can create longer, more accurate predictions for people with lower computing costs. These longer predictions could possibly also be used outside of AID. These prediction models could possibly be incorporated into open source AID or even commercial AID if anybody wanted to use those. And we did this all with an open source code base that can be extended for other research questions, such as looking at patterns of hypoglycemia, meal, user behaviors, and other research topics. And so that's where we'd love to see this work go. We have ongoing work after Open that will be applying this machine learning glycemic variability work to looking at hypoglycemia pattern detection and how AID could be improved with hypoglycemia. And I want to emphasize that all of the open code is open source, and this means it can be used by you or anybody else. This includes a large cleaning code database for large data sets of glucose data. It includes all of the glycemic variability metrics and code that we've used in these papers. There's the deduplication code to be able to use two data sets together. And there's also the gateway open source stuff as well that allows you to pair survey data and device data. So I think there's a lot of exciting things that came out of Work Package 3, and there's a lot of work that we're excited to do. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you in person, but you're very welcome to email me questions. And I'd also ask Bernd Reinhold and Drew Cooper if you could stand up and give a wave. These are two members of Work Package 3 who are there in person, I believe, and should also be able to answer questions about some of this work. Thank you so much. There are many dozens of people who worked on Work Package 3, either through secondment or on volunteer. Thank you so much for all of your contributions, and thanks to everybody for your interest in Open.
Do you want to stand up? Just so that everyone knows where they are. And you can go, thank you. Thank you. Now, I made a mistake. I forgot to take a break. We were meant to have a break for food. I'm sorry about that. I was so excited to hear Dana. We've got another video from Dana, but we're going to take a break right now. So everybody, we've got about 15 minutes, right? Yeah, 15 minutes. Don't be late because we will come and hunt you down. But please make your way out, get something to eat. But we've still got a great second half. So thank you so much, everyone. Okay, we're going to now see the second half of Dana. She's got a second presentation for us. Oh, sorry, take a seat. Which is about the future of diabetes research. Everyone has crystal balls today. We're all looking at the future. All right, let's go.
Hi, everyone. It's Dana Lewis again. I wanted to share some commentary on where I think the future of research is going as it applies to AID, machine learning, and other diabetes research. I think it's always important to contextualize that diabetes is really hard. We have so many variables, and that's why automated insulin delivery is so helpful, because we have a computer that can take the data from CGMs, insulin pumps, decide what to do, and enact changes in the insulin delivery itself. And we have countless studies of commercial AID, but we also have countless studies of open source AID showing improvements in glucose outcomes. We even have a randomized control trial in the New England Journal of Medicine showing positive outcomes in open source AID for adults and children. We see that kids spend over 3 hours more time in range every day, and adults spend about 3 hours and 41 minutes more time in range every single day using open source AID. And these results are really important because it indicates that people with type 1 diabetes, irrespective of what their level of engagement was or their outcomes, that they stand to benefit from automated insulin delivery technology. And very recently this month, we had the continuation results published from the same CREATE trial out to 48 weeks. And this also found that open source AID is effective and safe with different insulin pumps, and it further demonstrates that there are sustained glycemic improvements without additional safety concerns. So this has been really, really important. But the diabetes data that we have shouldn't just be about glycemic outcomes. It should also be about inputs and behaviors to help us improve not only our glucose outcomes, but also the quality of life for those of us living with diabetes. For example, when I'm talking about inputs and behaviors, I mean, if you could choose, what if you could choose from a menu between not needing to bolus or not needing to count carbs or announce meals at all, or being able to eat whatever type of diet, the amount of carbs that you want to eat based on what you want to eat based on your personal preferences, and being able to separate those input choices and behaviors from the ideal glucose outcomes for you in terms of what % time in range you want to target, the amount of hypoglycemia that you think is acceptable for you, and similarly, the amount of hyperglycemia that you can tolerate. This is something that we've had in open source automated insulin delivery for years, and we found that it's possible to do less work and get the same great outcomes with open source AID. This is a case study of an individual who has been kind enough to share their data with us over the years. This is a teenager who ate over 200 grams of carbs per day, did not do any meal announcement or carb counting, no bolus, no pre-bolus, just carried their open source AID system with them. And they've had an A1C of around 6.0 for over 4 years without doing much of the work that people with diabetes historically have had to do. Another great example of this is Silkaharo, whose family shared this wonderful graph showing the amount of corrections that adults had to do for the child with diabetes in the family before and after starting OpenAPS and open source AID back in the day. And you can see the very sharp drop in the graph of the number of actions that the family had to take. This is the benefit and the future of AID, is not just the better glucose outcomes, but also less work and less care and feeding of the AID system to get these great outcomes. And one other potential future thing I'm really excited to see is being able to use AID to redo a lot of research outside of diabetes. For example, to understand the impacts of new medications on glucose levels. For example, if you've ever been diagnosed and prescribed a new medication, you've probably looked at the label and it says something like, watch out for hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia. Well, as a person with insulin requiring diabetes, how helpful is that? It's really hard to know, are you going to run more sensitive or resistant to insulin? What exactly is causing these changes to glucose? And oftentimes, we don't know. The doctors don't know, and the studies didn't do an assessment to find out what was happening. They just saw some hypo, some hyperglycemia, and put it on the warning label. So we can possibly use AID to better understand what exactly happens to glucose levels when new medication starts. This is an example we published last year, looking at somebody who started on pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy and the glucose data from before they used the medication and the glucose levels after they used the medication. And you can pretty clearly see that the number of excursions above range pretty significantly reduced in the month following the start of this new medication. This is in somebody who already had above goal ideal time in range of about 92, 93%. So very little hyperglycemia for a long time, very little hypoglycemia, but we saw these reductions in the excursions after meals, particularly after breakfast, and we were able to see the difference in the rate of change of how quickly glucose went up or down before and after the medication. So in the past, we haven't been able to see clear correlations or even causation between all of our input behaviors, our boluses, our meal announcements, our carb counting, what we were eating, and to be able to make a difference or understand how each of those things impacted the outcomes of our average glucose level or A1C, the time spent in range, or the number of times we had to correct manually for highs and lows. And so the future of AID and diabetes research is really heading in the direction where we can separate and we can test and we can understand what happens when you bolus differently. What happens if you don't bolus or you partial bolus? You pre-bolus or you don't pre-bolus? You announce a meal, you count carbs, you don't count carbs, you eat different sizes and types of meals. And if you wanted to target time in range versus A1C or reduce the number of times you had to treat a low or high, that's something we're going to be able to work towards with the help of this data and this technology. And there's other data that we can research and learn from. For example, heart rate. I've noticed in particular that with high glucose levels overnight, even slightly high, that can give me a different higher overnight and resting heart rate. And it's also possible to see signal in the data. Once you've solved for the diabetes noise with an AID system, you can possibly see changes to heart rate from things like thyroid hormones being at non-typical levels, which might give you an indicator that you need to get your blood work done sooner than you otherwise would. There's also things like heart rate variability, which can give an early trend detection of infection or stress. Maybe you've been exercising a little too much and are heading towards overtraining, or maybe through menstrual cycle or sickness, something is going on. And basal body temperature is also something that can be useful for menstrual cycle timing or prediction and early detection of being sick. And all of this matters because research is pointing us in the direction that we can actually individualize insights to what matters to you, so you can understand your body and how you can do things differently or not to get the outcomes that you want for living with diabetes. So there might be things that you have questions that you've never been able to answer based on the research studies, but we might be able to eventually get individual level insights from this research. For example, what type of insulin, whether that's rapid or ultra rapid, acting insulin works more effectively for you. And when your pump sites are the most effective, when they start to degrade, typically in your body, and if there's different sites on your body that are more effective for pump sites or CGM. For example, if there's a location on your body that gives you a lot more noise in a CGM sensor, you might want to know about that so you can choose when and when not to wear your CGM in that place. And also exercise is important for a lot of us living with diabetes. What target should be set? When should we set that target? And what's the best strategy in terms of consuming carbs or having carbs on board and managing different levels of insulin activity going into and during long duration exercise, whether that's 30 minutes or many, many hours of exercise. So this is where the future is heading. And I think it's really, really exciting that we have increasing access to AID systems because that enables us to cut out the noise of diabetes and really separate the difference between our individual input behaviors and how we interact with the system, what the system is able to do, and to cut out so much noise of diabetes to be able to answer other questions that we've always had about medications and how the body works in these other conditions for which we've never been able to answer. But this is the future where we're going to be able to use these big data sets that I've talked about through the Open APS Data Commons and the Open Project. We're going to be able to answer more of these questions and also design future studies that you could potentially enroll in to help answer some more of these questions at an individual level and at a community and population level. I'm so excited for that. That's why I think that we still say we are not waiting. We are not waiting to use this technology, and we're not waiting to design better research because I think we can. And thank you so much to everybody who participates in diabetes research, who donates their diabetes data to projects like Open and the Open APS Data Commons, because that's what really empowers this research. Thank you so much.
Seriously, Dana's energy just radiates through a screen. She's just incredible. So wonderful. And we've got back to you guys needing to do a bit of work, cementy. But Katarina, come up with me. Let's have a chat about this. So same deal, please answer these questions. And if you've got anything you want to quickly add, put your hand up quickly and we can have a quick chat about it, but I've got to make up time. So good, thank you. All right, so what area of diabetes are you most excited to see studied more in the future? I'm going to ask you a question because you spoke before in your presentation about menstruation. Let's talk about things that are not researched enough. I will also just put a little plug in right now for our DDoC symposium this afternoon where we're going to be talking about one of these topics. But talk to me about it. How important is it that we start to really focus on things that are important to people with diabetes that we haven't looked at before?
Yeah, I think the menstrual cycle is a low-hanging fruit in terms of how can we improve AID and diabetes therapy in general. But I think the knowledge that we can generate from the community and from AID data can be also applied to multiple daily injections or to standalone pumping.
Yeah.
And there's not enough data. There are very small sample studies on menstrual cycles. I think the only big one is from the 90s where a lot of the women said, yes, I notice an impact, but what has happened since then? And then there's this one study with 12 people from the community where we've asked people like, how much extra work do you put in your open source AID to accommodate for differences in insulin sensitivity that is linked to the cycle? And we all had a couple of question marks still. So
yeah,
yes, please.
Absolutely.
More research on that.
Definitely. And Dawn, who is here, will be speaking about menopause and diabetes later on. Another topic that is just, I don't know, is it just too unsexy to talk about? I just wonder why it is that there's just hasn't been a focus on it. But let's move on to the next question. Thanks, Hannah. All right. So are there any topics or areas that you wish researchers would stop studying? I love this question. Have you got a yes to that? What do you wish people would stop researching?
That is a very good question. I don't know the answer to.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but I'm sure that I have seen studies and I've gone, really? Really?
I wish people would consider language matters in everything they publish. So please stop using terms like a subject. We are not subjects.
Participants.
We're not fully controlled. We did not fail on multiple therapies.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes.
So can we please stop that?
Stop that now. Yes, I like that. What have we got? Stop doing MDI versus AID studies. Okay. How to make patients more compliant. I know, don't you love that?
Another language matters classic.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
How do we make people more compliant? Compliance. So, gosh, and adherence. I feel like I'm amongst my people right now. This is so wonderful. Non-invasive glucose monitoring. It's not a holy grail for me. It's also invasive. Stop calling CGM non-invasive. I'm pretty sure it still sticks into my body. All right, let's move on to the next one. We've got 4. What is the biggest pet peeve with historical diabetes research? What should researchers do differently in the future with diabetes research? Well, the language stuff, absolutely. Yeah, agree. I know, I bet that in the next couple of days we will hear people refer to as subjects. It's like we've been subjected to research. We're participants. All right, include all races and genders. Yeah, a bit more diversity would be good. Yes.
Yeah, involve people with diabetes in research. It's still not happening a lot.
Yes, I like this one. Stop the type 2 diabetes stigma talk. Yes. I think you're right. Include people with diabetes. And you know what? This is where I talk about co-designing the co-design. It's not like co-design's a new buzzword like patient-centric, right? But it's often we get brought in to co-design at a point where so much is already done. I was like, well, co-design the co-design. Bring people in earlier. All right, and I know we're scooting ahead, but I'm trying to make up time. We've got one more. If you could get rid of one behaviour that you do related to diabetes, what behaviour is that? So I think that this is this is picking up on Dana's.
The rage bolus for me.
Rage bolus, yes.
Do you know that when you have a high?
Okay, who said they want to change their Lancet more often? That's a lie. No one wishes that. Bolusing. I wish that I was better at bolusing. David, Byron, stop mocking me.
New Lancet, new year, right?
Huh?
New Lancet, new year.
It's enough. I don't even think we need to do it I think we only need to do it. I think we only need to do it in leap years now. All right. Analyzing food. Yes. Oh, this is so great. Okay, this could be a whole day.
Worry about the future. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, I wish I could stop doing that. All right.
Me too.
Okay. I know, I want to keep talking about this, but we need to move on. Thank you. Thanks for jumping up. All right, excellent. All right, let's move on to work package 3. Shane, are you coming up? So I'm so excited to, yes? Sorry, say that again. Work package 4, sorry. It all went to pot when I forgot our break. Okay, Shane is currently co-researcher on the Beyond Algorithms project at the University of Birmingham. He also holds a fractional appointment in the School of Sociology at the University College Dublin. Is that still working? Yep. Where he has worked for a number of years. He has led this particular work package, and I'm very excited to hear him talk about what the barriers to uptake on open source AID are all about as part of this project. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, and hi everyone. Thanks, Renza, for the introduction. And I'd just like to add that this year is actually my 20th year of living with diabetes. I was diagnosed in July 2003, and it's not an anniversary I intend on celebrating, but just I suppose the experience of going on Android APS over the past few years has made the prospect of another 20 years of living with diabetes a lot more palatable. So I'm just grateful for the community for making it possible. So in this presentation, I'm going to try and address 2 questions. And the first question, I suppose, really was the overarching research question of the open project, which was, how do we make automated insulin delivery systems available to all people living with diabetes? And the second question is, what is the future of open source innovation in diabetes care? And what I want to argue is that the patient-led open source innovation described here today is not just a fringe movement, as Renza has said, that will disappear with the emergence of commercially developed OSAID. Instead, it is part of a much wider phenomenon in modern societies, whereby communities are increasingly addressing their unmet needs through what we refer to in the social science literature as commons-based peer-to-peer production. And furthermore, I want to argue that a commons-based approach to the production of medical technologies holds the potential to ensure that all people with diabetes can benefit from the technological advances we have made in diabetes care in recent years. So let me begin by elaborating on what I mean by the commons. So most people who are familiar with the term commons will associate it with unowned natural resources such as oceans and forests. However, the commons is more than a resource, and it's more than just the activity of sharing, which occurs in countless ways in everyday life. It is a resource plus a defined community and the rules, values, norms devised by the community to manage its resources. So in the case of OSAID, the resource can be the source code. The community consists of the developers and users who contribute their knowledge and their experiences, and the rules are the kind of peer governance around how the community interacts. And so the commons emerges as a self-organized system when people come together as a community to address their shared needs with minimal or no reliance on the market and state. And this is why, for me, the We Are Not Waiting movement represents an important moment in the history of diabetes care and healthcare more generally, as traditionally the production of modern medical technologies has exclusively been either the domain of private industry or public institutions. However, what we're now seeing is that patient communities collaborating through the commons increasingly have the capacity to modify and produce their own medical devices and treatments, thus potentially disrupting the dominance of this market state model. And so we've seen this in terms of the patient-led commons in diabetes care, how it's altered the prevailing medical technological landscape. So this is evident in the thousands of people who've adopted OSAID before commercial equivalents came to market, but also in terms of industry learning from the OSA community in terms of development of their own products. So having said all that, there are currently significant challenges to participating in and benefiting from the patient-led commons. So for example, we know there are tens of thousands of people who are members of online forums like Looped, but obviously only a fraction of those are OSAID users. So as part of Work Package 4, we administered a questionnaire among non-users of the We Are Not Waiting community with a view to establishing the common barriers to building an OS-AID. And the figure here shows the results of the questionnaire. I'm not going to go through all of it in detail, but the most significant barriers were low self-perceived IT literacy, fear of losing healthcare professional support, and difficulties in sourcing components. And so we argue in a paper that we published in the Diabetes Research and Clinical Practice that some of these most significant barriers, such as self-perceived low levels of IT literacy, can be overcome through the online advice and support of more technically savvy community members. And indeed, we've heard so many different stories about individuals who thought of themselves as having kind of low levels of IT literacy who later on were able to build a system for themselves and got a sense of agency and empowerment from that. However, there were other barriers to the uptake of OS-AID, such as difficulties in sourcing compatible insulin pumps and access to CGMs that were far more systemic and structural in nature. And this is the case even for countries with universal coverage of diabetes supplies like Germany, the UK and Ireland. And given these barriers, it's not surprising that users of open source AID, predominantly though exclusively, tend to be of relatively high socioeconomic status. And this is likely to remain the case as long as there remains significant inequalities in access to diabetes supplies. And then when you zoom out and look at things at a more global level, the overall picture would appear to be, in terms of access, would appear to be even bleaker. So Open has been fortunate to have an ongoing collaboration with T1 International, which is an amazing patient-led, not-for-profit diabetes advocacy organization. And every 2 years, they run an online survey examining the out-of-pocket expenses associated with diabetes and how they differ across countries. And so as part of Work Package 4, we supported a data analysis for the 2020 version of the survey. And the study, which we also published in Diabetes Research and Clinical Practice, found that 25% of people in the US with diabetes who took part in the survey reported using less insulin and or fewer supplies at least once in the last year due to cost. And similar trends were observed in countries situated in the Global South. So, for example, of those surveyed in Ghana, 69% reported rationing test strips at least once a week. And another notable finding is that participants in the survey also reported disruption in their insulin supplies and an increase in price during COVID-19. So, given all these, I suppose, stark inequalities in access, I suppose it really raises questions about the scalability and reach of the We Are Not Waiting movements and the patient-led commons. However, more recently, what we're seeing is that the We Are Not Waiting community is also inspiring other forms of open source innovation that move beyond algorithms and software to directly address the affordability and access issues in diabetes technologies. So we're going to hear in a few moments from Professor Martin DeBock about an initiative he is involved in, which aims to develop an ultra low cost open source insulin pump. And I know there's similar initiatives ongoing in India. And some of you will be familiar with the Open Insulin Project, which is seeking to address the high price of insulin in the US through the local manufacturing of an insulin generic. And all these initiatives are in development and not yet been tested, much less taken up by people with diabetes. But what I'd like to point out is what all these are examples of is a kind of growing offshoot of the commons called cosmolocalism. And so cosmolocalism is a system of production in which communities share knowledge and design as part of a global commons and then manufacture things locally. And it's made possible through a technological infrastructure that not only includes online social networks, but also the increasing accessibility of digital manufacturing technologies, such as 3D printers. And there's a growing number of examples of cosmolocal initiatives in healthcare. For example, open source 3D printable prosthetic hands and ankle foot ortheses. And of course, we saw the proliferation of various citizen-led projects aimed at addressing shortages of key medical equipment that arose during the pandemic. And so what proponents of cosmolocalism would argue is that by designing globally and manufacturing locally, it is possible to, number one, democratize healthcare by providing communities of people with chronic conditions more control over the production of the medical technologies they need to survive. But number two, make healthcare systems more resilient to the multiple ecological and social crises that we're facing in the 21st century. And so there are numerous question marks about how such a system of production fits with current paradigms of medical device developments. However, I would argue that these social and technological trends are going to continue to increasingly enable these more sophisticated forms of bottom-up innovation in the future. And at the very least, we need to think about their potential impact on people with diabetes and the wider ecosystem of diabetes care. So I'd like to conclude with this. Last year marked the centenary of the discovery of insulin, and we know that Banting, Best and Collip sold a patent for insulin to the University of Toronto for $1 each, with Banting declaring, "Insulin does not belong to me, it belongs to the world." He didn't explicitly use the term commons, but I think this is essentially what he had in mind. And I believe that the We Are Not Waiting movement and other open source initiatives it has inspired can help to play a key role in ensuring that everyone can share with benefits of advances in technologies in the 21st century.
Thank you so much. Amazing. And we're going to bring you up again in a minute, but take a seat for now. Martin, do you want to come up? We are now going to talk about, pick up on something there that Shane spoke about. We've got Martin DeBock now. He is a paediatric endocrinologist and clinical researcher from New Zealand. He says, and gosh, this made me cry when I read it, he learned most of what he knows from people with diabetes, and he's still learning. Thank you so much. Oh, wonderful. All right, thank you.
So you do have an imposter amongst your midst. I do not have type 1 diabetes, which is probably my strongest disclosure. I just want to, can I just go a second? I'm just going to put my email up because I think it was a really good question here about equity. We've got a Google Share document that we're going to go through every talk in ATTD to see whether or not equity was mentioned, yes or no, or not applicable. So anybody could I can just send you the link to that Google Doc and you can just say yes, no, and we should, between everybody, probably cover all of the conference, including all the posters. So I'm just going to put my email up and you can just email me, say, can you send me the link? And then you can just fill it out when you're at the conference. Is that all right?
Yes, that is such a great thing. Please share that too, so that people can. We want
to publish it in DGT, the brief report, so that Tade and Moshe, who own that conference,
yes,
see what
okay,
they're doing.
Brilliant. See what they're doing, but we're not shaming people. But we're not shaming people. Like let's be very clear about that. All right. So you can all take a photo or something.
A tech conference on a chalkboard.
I know. That's fun. How retro.
Martin.debock@otago.ac.nz.
There is a dot there, right, between the Martin and the DeBock? Yes, there is a dot. All right. Okay.
All right,
thank you.
So you can go and crack on. So, so this is a bit of fun, really, and that's what I do the research for because it's heaps of fun. So, and I am conflicted, but I think if I am conflicted, I might as well be conflicted with everybody, right? So, I'm really riding the crest of other people's work here, but the story starts when I moved back to New Zealand. There was an engineering guy called Professor Jeff Chase at the University of Christchurch, who is a mad professor in engineers, and I can't understand him most of the time because engineers speak a different language. But I sat down and I said, well, why don't we start dismantling this whole bit component by component? We need the hardware. And he goes, I've waited for somebody like you to turn up in my room for like 20 years. It was like, cool. And he was immediately all about altruism and not-for-profit and let's just build it. It's like, okay. And I said, well, why don't we make it half the price? And he said, oh, just get out. I'm not interested unless it's like 1/100th of the price. So that's where it all started. And this is some New Zealand data about the utility, that pumps are underutilized because of their high costs, and it depends on where you live and what healthcare or reimbursements you have that access it. But really in New Zealand, for example, only less than 10% in 2014. It's gone up since then. Had a pump in New Zealand, which was pretty sad really because of what doors it opens, particularly now with automation. So the idea was, well, can we build a pump that's really, really cheap, like super cheap? Like there's no point having it somewhere in between. If you can do it, why not get it down to nothing? So we were trying to get something that's 20 times to a 20th of the price. So you could build 20 pumps for the price of one for yourself. And there were two sort of ideas about how you could build that. And there's a mechanical drive and one where you've got a hardware only pump. And I'll speak about the mechanical drive was a clockwork system. So imagine like a watch, like an analog watch, right? You change a battery once every 4 years, right? Which is kind of a cool concept, different form, and we haven't quite got there yet with that. But then the other point is just to build a pump with a classic syringe driver. Syringe drives have been off patent for years, right? If you go to the ICU in a hospital and you get all those Baxter ICU syringe drivers, they don't cost $10,000 a syringe driver, and they're giving drugs way more scary than insulin to keep somebody alive on a ventilator. So it's a little bit weird that we are under this pump cost, although I can understand all the regulatory stuff that industry has to go through. But anyway, so the study, working with the engineers, we wanted to develop a prototype pump that was really cheap with a battery life that's more than a year. And then we wanted to test it and whether or not we could meet the standards that the normal commercial pump guys have done. And then we wanted to test that accuracy on the pumps we built. And then from there, we wanted to put it on people with diabetes. And we have done 1, 2, and 3, which I'm going to show you, and we're just getting ready to do number 4. So the pump design and build is open source. So you can go now to this link right now, click on that, and it will tell you the CAD files and tell you line by line how to build that pump. And this is what it looks like. And so you can order the parts, tells you where to order the parts, how to build it, how to solder it together. And that's by no chance that we've used a Medtronic infusion set. And those who you know about what's happening with Medtronic infusion sets will perhaps know why we chose that. Should I just say it? Like it's getting generics, basically, it's coming off patent. So you could effectively get generic consumables too for a much cheaper part. Then we tested its accuracy, and this is kind of cool. So this is a trumpet error curve. So I'll try and talk my way through it. So this is your percentage error of the flow as you go through and with time. So when you start an insulin pump at any time, it's quite inaccurate. And we compared this to a 640G, which was new, and then over time becomes more accurate. And in the blue is the low-cost pump, and in the pink is the commercial pump. So effectively, it was just as good right at the end. Initially, it was actually more accurate, but look how quickly it was under the underflow. Did really well. So it was absolutely fine, as accurate as any commercial pump you can get on the market. And this, again, is another way to look at a percentage error of a commercial pump versus an ultra-low cost. Just another way of doing the same thing over time. But this was using when you requested a dose of 0.025 units, so very micro doses, which is what the interesting point is, of course, when you're thinking about open source or any automated system, is that it needs to be accurate at the micro source. Although engineers would argue that you don't if you think over a longer period of time, but I'm not even going to get in that argument. So again, just going back to give you some hope in this field is that we have developed a prototype that's actually less than $100 to build. If you went and built the components, 100 New Zealand dollars, so that's like $50 US to build a pump. We have validated its performance to an IEC standard, and we've published that. And they did actually do a new testing method, but we've done that, but I'll leave that alone. And now what we're doing is we're just ramping up to put people on the system. We will do it under a really careful a hospital-style environment to do that testing, because it's a little bit scary for a clinician, even though it shouldn't be, to do that. And so that's pretty cool. And we are partnering up with the open source to immediately just use an open source algorithm on top of that. So the idea is that you break component by component in terms of the automated system. So if we can do the algorithm for free and we can do the pump for almost free, then the last cab off the rank is the sensor. And I think probably watch that space commercially. I think in the next decade, we'll see this broken right up. And the idea then is, of course, is that you address equity issues and access. And I really like that word. Was it Cosmo? What was it? Cosmo-localism. That's a fantastic word. And the concept that you can build something locally to deal with those cost factors. And I'm not going to talk about the regulatory implications of that in this talk. So this is the engineering team, a massive team. So I just want to introduce you to them. Where's the main guy? Is this Jeff Chase. He's been around for ages doing stuff in insulin in ICU settings. And he was doing clamps in the ICU as a clinical tool to keep glycemic levels fine in New Zealand ICUs for a long time. And then he's got this army of PhD students. And we're funded by our New Zealand Science Challenge. And so acknowledging them in advance, the Nascents group who are helping us build it as an automation. So yeah, that's a really short talk, but I think it's more just to say, hey, look at the space, we can do things in here. Thanks.
Don't go anywhere. Mind blown. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Shane, come up. And Vangelis, please come up as well. I'm going to let you introduce yourself in just a sec. We've got a bit of a Q&A. And once again, as I always say, the more you do, the less I do. So please feel free to ask some questions. Vangelis, thank you for joining us at the end. Would you like to introduce yourself really quickly to everybody, please?
Thank you for having me here. I am Vangelis. I am a postdoc researcher. I examined the commons. In the last years, I am the principal investigator in a research project entitled Techno-Social Innovation, the Collaborative Economy. I examine platform cooperatives, the digital commons, cosmolocalism, open cooperativism, and the distributed autonomous organizations on blockchain, alternative socioeconomic models. And what you are doing is mind-blowing, and it's an empirical case study of my theoretical work. That's it. Fantastic.
Okay, I've got some questions. So I'm going to start with you, Martin. Here we go. How might an open source approach to medtech hardware change access to insulin pumps? Now, you've touched on that, but can I just be clear about this? You think it's a USD $50?
You can order the part now, now, and you can build it. You can just follow the recipe. It's line by line how to do it. If you guys are tech savvy, you guys have done open source with the code. I think this is, if you're clever with your hands, just the same.
Are there step-by-step instructions?
Step-by-step instructions. I can't talk to the language that it's in because it might be an engineerish.
Right.
Which I struggle to understand.
Engineerish, like Elvish. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. But I think it's line by line. When you click on that link, it says here is the line by line instructions.
Amazing. All right. I don't know. Like I just
don't put it on you, please. Yeah.
No.
Still lots of work to be done.
Yeah, built from a safety first approach. Yep. Though. Answer the question. I'm going to go to you too now, Shane. What do you, when you see this? I don't know. I'm totally blown away by this in a really, really good way. I just want to say, but I just feel like this is remarkable. This is how we level playing fields.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think there's just so many implications. And I think what's really important is that this is done, I suppose, as part of a community that is community-led, and it's not basically individual, atomized, like people just buying a 3D printer in their own home, and so then that would, in fact, I suppose, exacerbate the inequalities. So it needs to be community-led by, obviously experts, engineers, but also patients at the center of it, driving the governance of it. I think that's key because, otherwise you're kind of setting a situation where people can do it in their own homes, and you're kind of driving that inequality further.
So that study design through is co-designed from the start. So all the way through, although we've just built a box, but during every step we've got people with diabetes involved and asking, and not only people with diabetes, but community in terms of healthcare professionals, all of that out there beyond the local group are all involved every step.
Yeah, we've got some questions, and I'll come back to you in a minute, Martin, because we have got some questions from people watching at home. But again, if there's anyone in here who wants to ask a question, now's your time. Vangelis, I'm going to ask you, so what is the role of people with lived experience when it comes to an open source approach to hardware in particular? I mean, I think we can take deep breaths and say we get the software side of things, we've got open, and we're closing open. But what about when it comes to hardware?
what is the role of people?
Yeah, people living with diabetes when we're talking about diabetes-specific hardware.
To provide data, to participate, to be part of an inclusive alternative socioeconomical model, to benefit in multiple possible ways, variously.
So it's all very central.
Also to become prosumers, to take the means of production, to own them, to use them, and to change the system if they want.
Fantastic. Now, did I see a hand up? Yes. We have a mic. Hang on a sec. We just want to make sure everybody can hear you.
Bryan Cleal from the Netherlands. I'm still thinking about this pump and building it. So I'll probably order it in 5 minutes or so, but it's a little bit strange I haven't done it already. But my question is, how do I implement it in my algorithm? How does it connect? Is it
so
Bluetooth?
That's what we're building now is the Bluetooth capability of it. So that's the next.
Okay, so I should wait how many weeks?
Watch this space. We're building it now with the guys. So that's been the really nice thing about this community is that at this point, before we started building Bluetooth hardware, is that we went to the engineers, that's you guys, and saying, how do we make this simple instead of trying to reverse it? Like you guys have been doing for so long to try and reverse that engineering. Why don't we do it from the start to make it simpler and make the connectivity easier and all those dropout issues that you may have experienced, that we get that right at the start.
Yeah, great.
So how
great
many
job.
weeks?
Thank you very much.
Because, you know, there's a hashtag we are not waiting. So
I'm trying.
Okay, we've got a question at home. What's the durability of the pump? Everyone wants details.
So that's not tested yet, right? So we this is really its infancy. We're on we're on baby steps. So please be with us.
No, and I think I would hope that people are only supportive because these early steps get to the steps that will be at in 6 months, 12 months time.
And the flip coin is it's not a $10,000 piece of hardware anymore.
Yes.
So you could have 10 of them.
Yeah.
And one in the glove box, you know.
Yes.
One in your backpack. Oh, well, it's no good anymore.
So it'll become like we think of blood glucose meters.
It's a horrible thought, isn't it? But anyway.
Yeah, I know, and we don't want to do that. Yeah. Melissa, hello.
Hello, Melissa Holloway from the UK. So there was a bad thing that happened almost 10 years ago where Northern Ireland spent £2 million buying a bunch of pumps from Medtronic, and over half of the units actually expired in cupboards. They were actually not distributed by the time that the expiry date had been reached on the packaging because the healthcare system wasn't really equipped to scale up its access to pumps. Not enough diabetes nurses had been on pump training courses to know how to set up people on pumps because they had never needed to. And suddenly they had this great big wave of access and no infrastructure. How will you be managing that if we are able to visualize this future?
Is that directly to me? All right.
Everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's to speak to Brian's question around the formal, like, I suppose, incorporating the expertise and the knowledge of the community into formal healthcare structures. And that's what we need, like someone to bring the community in to involve them in the training.
Yeah.
I'm not licensed to prescribe
I
insulin.
know, I understand that, yeah. But I think that there's certainly a role there in the community in part of the training anyway. That would be my perspective on it.
I mean, we're hearing this right now in Australia. We'll hear from Vangelis in a minute. In Australia, where we last year managed to have CGM for all people with type 1 diabetes. It's brilliant. There is great funding there so that every single person in Australia, the only criteria is that you have to have type 1 diabetes and have a form signed by a healthcare professional, specific healthcare professional. But there was no budget for training. And so we have health professionals screaming out that this is extra work for them. They're not, a lot of them really aren't still trained up with understanding how CGM works and what it is that they need to do. So I think that's a very valid point. If we are making things more and more accessible, how do we make sure that there actually are people, healthcare workers to help train? But yes, Vangelis, did you want to say something? We've got hands flying up. How long have we got for this session? Until tomorrow at 3, is that right? 10 minutes. 10 minutes to go. Okay, good. Yep.
Well, there is a three-zoned model in the literature. regarding a model of open cooperativism between the commons, the community, ethical market entities aligning around the commons, and the partner state that funds, provides legislation, etc. And this is more of a theoretical sketch rather than an empirical reality. There are some case studies around the world. We examine them right now. But what we see from the empirical level in open source hardware in particular, there is a common three-zone model structure of entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, between the community, the commons, the researchers, the activists, the doctors, the institutions, the ministries, and the people, the patients, the users that come together and they create a bottom-up model of social technological innovation.
Yep, amazing. Rayhan.
Thank you guys all for the wonderful talks. I did want to bring up the other pancreas. I don't know if anybody's looked at that website in a while, but they have had the recipe up since 2019 for building one of these do-it-yourself pumps. And one of the things that I have tried to do, I've tried to bring open source AID to Africa and India. And I have suggested, because almost everything on our threads is the pumps cost too much, the pumps cost too much. But when I send them this link, even to technologically savvy areas like Bangalore, India, there's still this real resistance to building the pump itself, even when the technological resources exist. So how do you remove those barriers? And what do you think about the fact that, hey, there has been, available plans for now 3 years, for almost 4 at this stage. Why are people not just doing that part themselves? Why is it that the software people seem to be more keen to do than the hardware?
I think we've got probably a geographical dichotomy there. So if you are in Europe, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, you don't need to, on the whole. If you're in Africa or India or wherever where you're trying to get access to hardware because it's so expensive, you still need, while there's a lack of a commons, a champion to help you. And that's probably what's lacking. A local champion who will hold your hand and be there with you. And I don't know how you overcome that except for exposure, 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 exposure. And from bottom up, make the champions by keeping us relevant to you guys. I'm more than happy to just keep doing what I need to do.
There's a gentleman here from, I think, from India, hopefully, Manish and Deval. Would you like to speak on this topic? Great. Good to meet you, by the way.
Nice to meet you. Hi, I'm Deval here, and along with Dr. Manish here, we are working on an affordable insulin pump for type 1 diabetic patients. Initially, our goal was also to make the entire device designs available open source. And we started thinking this could be a part of the triad of the algorithm CGM and the pump being open source again. The key issue that we faced was our pumps are right now, prototypes are also 3D printed, but the variability and the fact that building hardware requires more hardware, that is a key challenge that led us to probably developing the entire system in-house rather than making one level of it open source and then hoping the community picks it up, because that requires more and more hardware to build it up and in a repeatable manner. The key issue is that not every printer is going to print the pump the same way, and the variability leads to a lot of safety issues, and we've had even within our devices variability of as high as 50-100% of inaccuracy between pumps. So that is something that led us to think that why don't we still go ahead in a conventional fashion, but ensure that a key goal is still affordability right from day one. And we do that and go through the entire regulatory system that any large multinational corporation has to go through, but yet come out at the end of it at a price point that everyone can afford, at least for the starters in India. And then if it's affordable in India, I'm sure it'll be affordable everywhere else.
Yeah, exactly. We don't expect people to build this pump themselves.
Yep.
That's not the model that we're planning to do.
Yeah.
We're trying to create a process to build in partnership with very low cost manufacturing.
Yep. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Did you want to add something to that? No? Okay. Yes. Sorry. Here. Oh, you know what? Take a seat. I'll do it. And then we're going to wrap up. This is the last question or comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Renza. Hi, I'm Sahil from India. I think the question that you raised, that why people are not using pumps in India, specifically when it's maybe, cheaper options are available. They are not ordering like they are using in Europe or America. One of the reasons I feel belonging to the community for almost 11 years and living with type 1 is, apart from the affordability factor, there is a lot of social stigma as well related to using medical devices. No one, I'm sure it's very different here and in other countries, but hiding your pumps, hiding your CGMs is still a thing in India. Might be very less in the cities you might have heard of, or where most of the research is happening, but it is not the case. I started when I've been working with T1s with NGOs for 7 to 8 years, and every time I meet a new T1, especially their parents, they are of this say that, okay, is there any way to just hide the medical device? We don't want to show to our relatives, or the kid doesn't feel comfortable in the school. So that is one of the most important factors I feel in India or Asian countries maybe.
Thank you so much. I think that's really critically important that we remember that. I'm so sorry. We do need to wrap up. Thank you so much to our 3 speakers. You can take a seat now. Okay. All right. Good. Hey, Rayhan, you're just sitting there.
I guess I'll get it.
Come up. We just love throwing extra things on a program. Now, I was going to just bring you up and spring this on you, but we've also already seen you, so thank you for coming up again. I'm just going to leave you to stand here and just to have a really quick chat, sum up, tell us what your thoughts of today have been.
Well, I can't remember how many years ago it was now that I saw Shane get up on stage at a conference and describe this open project along with Kati and the group, and I just thought, my God, this is amazing. And who else but the EU to actually put money into where it should be going? I think the work done here has been truly incredible. I mean, you've approached things from the social perspective, from the technology perspective, from the clinical perspective. Each of these work products is a testament to how much effort has gone into this. And I think we all need to give you a round of applause for all this work. I think the landscape, of course, is changing as time goes on. We are seeing more commercial systems, not as many as any of us would like. We'd like always to have more options, more flexibility. And we know that the current landscape does not allow us to innovate at the pace that is possible. So I don't think we are ever going to see an end to open source systems. We're always going to have people who want to make changes, who want to do things a little bit differently, who want to understand how their system works and even be able to manipulate it if they would like to. So this work tells you that, you know, it's tough for any other industry to keep pace with the level of innovation that we see on the technological front and on the societal front. But I do think in the scope of all of this, we must remember, I told you, I've had about 3,200 people I've started on these open source systems. And, you sometimes think to yourself, looking at this data, okay, the only people using these are white, overserved, college-educated people on private insurance. But guess what? I get those people to pay for my dev accounts so that I can give it to the people who are making less than $50,000 a year, who are Spanish-speaking only in the US. And they don't necessarily sign up for these trials. They don't necessarily have the time to sign up on Open Humans. And I think this is crucially important, that if we are going to be an inclusive society, we need to include the members who are most affected by diabetes. The people who are sitting there with A1Cs above 14% must be included in this research. We should not let regulators say, you cannot do a study with people with an A1C above a certain goal. The question was also asked, what role do people with diabetes play in research? They play the most significant role. You don't have studies without people living with diabetes. You need to involve them in the design of studies as well. That's crucially missing. People come up with protocols that have all sorts of crazy things, meal challenges, exercise challenges, and nobody asks the person who's going to participate in this study, how would you like to do this? What question would you like answered? And I think the open project speaks to the need to involve the community in all aspects of diabetes care, because you are the ones who are touched by the disease. So this is just to summarize and say, Open has done incredible work. I only see amazing things in the future, and let's try to spread this to everyone who can benefit from it.
Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to give that to you, and I'm going to give one to you because I'm about to jump off. My work here is done, but before I go, I just want to say a couple of things. Firstly, for anybody who is part of the next, there's another meeting. You will know if you're part of that meeting. It's a roundtable meeting. If you are part of that meeting, you will need to hang around out here. So that's important. The other thing I want to mention is that the DDoC Symposium is at 4:15 this afternoon in Hall 1A?
A4.
A4, not even close. Hall 4A. Please do come to that, because this just continues. Is very much focused on the community, nothing about us without us. Thank you so much to everybody for being here, to our incredible speakers today. I'm going to hand over now to Hanne and to Shane, who are going to wrap this all up. But honestly, the future is bright. Please think access this week. Please think access this week, because I think I'm so pleased that has become a focus of our open closing ceremony. So thank you so much. Okay.
Well, first of all, thank you, Renza. And of course, you're going to get some Berlin chocolate, because apparently we do chocolate in Berlin. Thank you. Thanks so much. So thanks everybody for coming. It's truly a pleasure to have seen all of your beautiful faces here today. And also thanks everybody for watching at home. We're so sorry that there were so many technical glitches. I personally am not a fan of Microsoft Teams, but that's what the Charité is using, so we're sticking with that. Thanks for hanging around, and thank you so much for attending today. And there's one more thing to do, and I would like to ask everybody who's been working with Open to come and join us down here, please. That's including all the speakers for today. Thank you.
Yeah, well, before that, maybe just to say, Hanne, Open would have been absolutely impossible. Is this thing on? Well, Open would have been impossible without you, and we would have been completely lost. And so thank you for everything, and making this such a special occasion. And these are just a small token of my appreciation from the community.